Welcome to Happy Times and Places, which is a positively inclined Doctor Who episode commentary podcast in which I, Toby Haydock, ask a special guest to choose a story and select their favourite things about it in secret. I have to watch, commentate, and try and guess what those favourite things are.
Hello, Toby. As requested, here are 5 things that I like about Remembrance of the Daleks from 1988.
Hello, good evening, and welcome to this edition of Happy Times and Places. I paused for a moment there because suddenly Toby Haydock's Time Travels came into my head, because that is the umbrella that I have, because if I wanted to do all the podcasts I wanted to do separately, I would have to pay for a feed for each one, and that's not going to happen. I've just had the what's it called? I was going to say the Nostradamus. No, the whatever it is when they say the projected rise in our household energy bills come through, and oh dearie me, no. So everything's staying under one stream. Even if I do 10 different podcasts, they're all going to be under Toby Haydock's Time Travels. But this is Happy Times and Places, where I watch a Doctor Who story nominated by a friend. The friend whose voice you heard there didn't introduce himself. He was very to the point. He's a very amiable and good conversationalist when it's one-to-one. But I don't know if it was because he could sense the nation listening in that he was very terse there. That's Charles Norton, who is a dogged, hard-working producer who has put together various animations on Doctor Who DVDs and made sure they've got extras where often there was little budget so to do. He made a great documentary on Power of the Daleks with scant resources, made it a sort of day-to-day production diary, which is a really interesting thing to do. He thinks outside the box a little bit, Charles, and he also worked on the Quatermass and the Pit Blu-ray, where he and I travelled up and down the country talking to people who were still alive from it, and it was all rather ad hoc, and but we got it. And then he cut together all the stuff we got together from disparate areas, and then I filled in the blanks with a commentary myself. So, what a contribution he has made, unsung and behind the scenes, and he's a good guy, is Charles. And whenever he phones me, it always says caller ID not recognised, but I sort of know it's him, and it's and I always answer, and I mean, I suppose one day I'll go, "Hello, Charles," and it would be somebody like, "No, you want to buy a thing?" I don't know why that's my scam call. Or, "Hey, mister, give me your..." That's a sultry lady voice. "Give me your email passwords and I shall show you my boobies." But it's normally Charles going, "Toby, do you know who's still alive from this thing? Or what do you think if we tried to do a DVD release of the existing material of United?" By the way, that's about a split second, I think. But I always look forward to Charles because I have conversations with him that I cannot have with probably anybody else. You know how there are Doctor Who fans, and then there are Doctor Who fans' friends from whom you get one sort of particular thing. I have different friends that, if I want to chat about, the state of different film prints, there's one that I will talk to. If I want to talk about where certain actors are or might be, there's another one or two or three that I talk to. If I want to talk about stuff that sort of goes beyond Doctor Who and goes into other sort of ephemera that, might pique the interest of one or the other, there's another, it's a bit like Doctor Who. I always say that the beauty of Doctor Who is there's a story for whatever mood I am in. There is also, I like to think, in my sort of strange network of friends now, which is odd because I didn't have many Doctor Who fan friends at all when I was a kid. There is now a Doctor Who fan to suit whatever conversation I require. Anyway, we're going to go for an acknowledged classic of Doctor Who, but one that I have a very complicated relationship with. which we will explain as we go through. Because, of course, when I watched this, when it first came out, I was 14 years old, and 14-year-olds are as, are as angry as those people on Twitter, many of whom I suspect might be 14-year-olds. But anyway, yeah. Well, let's talk about this. But don't worry. Any criticism I have of Remembrance of the Daleks is past me talking, and I shall reprimand him because he knew nothing. Because I love, last time I did this story, I had the pleasure of doing a commentary for Phantom Films on one of their Who Talk CDs, and the cast all joined along as well. And what a jolly bunch they are! Simon Williams is a great guy, and I had a great time watching it with them, and it's one of my favourite commentaries I've ever done. So I'm looking forward to doing this one where I get to say everything. And, of course, to check in with Charles at the end to see what he likes, which, judging by his introduction, he will be straight to the point with. So I will perhaps have to, go into further detail. Anyway, I would like you, and we're not going to go straight into the theme, are we? Because this one has a pre-title sequence. But we are going to initiate that with our, space view of Earth in 3, 2, 1. I love this opening. I mean, even though I was angry, Doctor Who hating Doctor Who fan, which we will get into, and season 24 had been a bit of a rough time. This immediately seemed, this opening here, look at that, seemed, and the choice of the clips, because anything that sort of evoked the past and had some sort of sense of history about it automatically sort of seemed top class. And I think that sequence is the sound editing is excellent. It's a shame it pauses just at the end, but maybe that's deliberate. But it seems like the special effect has kind of run out. But it's a great start. And I think the season announces itself, because the sea change between season 24 and season 25, in terms of sort of production, it did seem to me like season 24, which did have the vibe of kind of galloping galaxies and Captain Zepp's mum and dad are coming round for tea, so they've tidied up a bit. Whereas this seemed like, they've gone to the effort to make, Juliet Bravo, but aliens are coming. It seemed sort of proper. And of course, we've got a lot of references to old Doctor Who and to the past, because we are in the 25th anniversary. And we're always, I think, as fans, going to have mixed feelings about that, partially because, I don't know about you, but I always have an eye on the mythical casual viewer and go, well, I might like this, but other people who don't hate themselves might not like it, and that would be better. And I might help myself for liking this because it shows that I only like things because they blah de blah de blah. But I automatically think there's a great confidence about these two. I love the lick of the pace with which this gets started. I think Andrew Cartmell's decision not to have any TARDIS scenes automatically just starts adventures going, at a lick. These two, I think, have a great chemistry. But as a young man, I was very much on the sort of lookout for things, and even an episode like this, which has got so many good things about it, I'll be able to point out the 2 or 3 things that kind of ruined it for me because they didn't even do that bit properly. And yet I did really enjoy watching this story, but also because I kind of knew it was going to be the one that everybody liked the best. Its shortcomings for me, therefore, made me want to be more sort of vocal about. And I wrote for a sort of local group fanzine at this time. It was one of my sort of brief dalliances with fandom, and so because everybody loved Remembrance, I wanted to be the guy that told it off. And Greatest Show in the Galaxy was my story of the year. and I still have a soft spot for Greater Show and would still probably edge it over this. But then again, that's partially because of my sort of race memory of going, well, I'm championing the underdog, and people like this more than they like Remembrance. So of course I like the kudos of going, well, I'll actually tell you why the story that nobody talks about enough is the better one. But this is obviously great. You know, looking back at it now, where I don't have anything to prove and I've grown up a bit. Because it was a long time ago, even though I think of this as very modern Doctor Who. Love the creepy girl, who's really spooky. This is great. Sylvester, you know, jumping and doing stuff. I don't know quite why he's measuring the thing with his umbrella, but he's just trying to be inventive. Dursley McClendon here, absolutely beautiful young man. And I made a real mistake about him, which I will explain a little bit later on. And I remember, because, you know, quite often at this period, you know, the Doctor Who production team would, you know, sort of release, these people are going to be the guest stars of this. And I remember Harry Fowler he was listed as one of the people going to be the guest stars. And you never knew then whether that meant actually it would be quite a small part like this, or whether they'd, you know, do everything. Because sometimes they'd announce, like Peggy Mount, you know, she's announced as one of the guest stars, but she's only in a handful of scenes. But that's John Nathan Turner, you know, using what he called the knicker elastic money to get, you know, even small parts, you know, becoming sort of cameos by people he thought were famous, because I didn't have a clue who Harry Fowler was. But my granddad did and my mum did, so that all helps and that's all good. I've since learned that Harry Fowler, who plays Harry... In fact, can I say this? Yes, I can. It's the sort of thing... I love this, by the way. I don't know why she's, you know, doing the nursery rhyme, but well, because she knows it's the Doctor, because it turns out that she's the one you thought was Davros. And she's got a great, slightly husky voice, and she's really scary, and those sort of waspish eyes that she has. This is great, the way the Doctor just sort of jumps in and goes, this... and of course, she's showing. Oh, I'm slightly, you know, I'm not entirely sure of you, but because he's got in there quick and said all the sciencey stuff, he's half kind of won her over, which is again great kind of economical stuff, and it's good character stuff for the Doctor. And it's very nice, and it's lovely to see Pamela Salem, who of course have been in the Robots of Death. Yes, so Harry Fowler. Harry Fowler is, I mean, I don't know an awful lot about the schlongs of Doctor Who guest stars, but I on the grapevine of, you know, thespian / BBC gossip, Harry Fowler is renowned in certain quarters for being one of the best endowed people in the business of show. Make of that what you will, but you're here for the facts, and that is one of them. That's a very nice reveal, because you've got the nice guy, you know, in the cafe that Ace has met, and then, you know, chatting along, and the little seed of, hey, you from somewhere else, which is where we get one of the big surprises later, and then Sergeant, boom. So you've got, that's actually very economical, nicely paced bits of storytelling, where it's giving us a couple of little seeds for the future, but also then has a surprise this early in the episode. Oh, she's talking to a nice guy. Oh, he's a sergeant. Oh, so then on, they're the military. Oh, boom, boom, boom. You know, it's layer upon layer, which is very nicely done. And this is, you know, this episode has gone very, very quickly and very excitingly. And I think the fact that it's set on a recognizable Earth, you know, is helpful for a season opener. And the military thing, I think, always works very nicely with Doctor Who. You know, especially if he sort of contrasts with it, but it gives it that sort of dramatic, you know, heft that we're used to from sort of action adventure-y stuff, and it makes Doctor Who feel a little bit sort of grown up. And Simon Williams, just a lovely actor, really nice guy as well, actually. He sent me a cheque for £10 when I was a drama student. I was trying to put a showcase together for me and some mates, and I wrote to a few actors, and he said, I so wish this could have an extra nought on it, but it can't. But he sent me a tenner, and that's just a nice thing to do. I shudder now that I wrote to actors, because I wrote to actors who I thought were loaded, you know, because they were on telly and stuff. And now I know quite quite the truth of what an actor's life is like. If somebody sent me a letter asking for money, I'd be like, oh, really? And here's Karen Gledhill, who is now, I think, the chairperson, or certainly high up in the Actors Benevolent Fund, where I get my Christmas cards from. There's been a bit of a schism with the Actors Benevolent Fund. I think there's the People's Popular Actors Benevolent Front now as well, and all those sorts of schisms that I haven't quite got to grips with. So I don't want to come out in favour of one side or the other, but I still get my Christmas cards from there in order that the charity that looks after actors who've hit hard times gets my money at Christmas. And it means you occasionally get a Christmas card that's been designed by Edward de Souza, Mark Corey, or Clive Francis, who's never been in Doctor Who and should have been. One of the soldiers is in that wide shot. I think he puts his legs apart when everybody else puts them together, and it is quite noticeable. But never mind. Peter Hamilton Dyer, who plays the sergeant here, he was all over cast lists at the Royal Shakespeare Company, this guy here. And it was quite fun because you notice his name, being this one episode Doctor Who character, and then suddenly he, the next couple of years he was appearing and getting good sort of notices in stuff. So it's like, Doctor Who does it again, picks an actor that is obviously going to have a great future. But I haven't actually heard from him much recently, so it looked to me like he was going to be one of those actors that did a small part that had been really good, because Doctor Who could be quite good at that, getting somebody nice and early, like Owen Teale in Vengeance on Varos, and quite a few people around this time. I think Dursley McClendon in this is so great. He's like a Matanella. Oh, and this might well be my favourite thing of the episode. Watching this as a 14-year-old, who'd stared at a green baby coming out of an egg in a holiday camp, and Delta the Bannerman had gone, what's happened to my favourite programme? And you see a Dalek Ray. One, I much prefer the short sort of bolt rather than the line. That seemed to me like, wow, they can do that now, and that saves you all sorts of problems with sort of lining up the special effects as well. But then seeing it turn the person into a skeleton and have that throw tipping backwards into the corrugated iron, that to me was like if Doctor Who had come and told me I was sexy. And I remember a friend at school saying, is that the Brigadier? Because he says, listen to me, Brigadier. So obviously all that's trying to do is the Doctor, because he's eccentric and when he's used to shouting at military men, he's used to shouting at the Brigadier. But to young kids who didn't necessarily put two and two together, although this is the same guy, a mate of mine at school, who asked me if Commodore Travers was Travers from the Web of Fear, and it's like, I think you've got your timelines slightly skew, but it shows the danger of referring back or having references to the past. Even when something isn't representing a tie to a previous story, people might think that it is because tying one name to another is easier than actually thinking of the logistics of it, especially when you're young and don't quite follow the stories in the way that you understand them when you're older. Nothing even remotely human could have survived that. Great, that's not even remotely human. I think Sylvester just tried too hard a little bit with some of that stuff. I think he's much better when he's sort of brooding and melancholy. I remember thinking, Mike seemed like such a hero, and I don't think he'd been announced in any of the sort of pre-press, and that's great, that beam going through the window and him ducking, and this battle sequence is really, really nicely done, and he's got a fantastic submachine gun and a very cool jacket. This looks really good, and it's really exciting. And they spelt Foreman wrong on the junkyard doors, which just ruins the whole thing. And I love the little bit of fire on the base of the Dalek. That's really cool. And it's really nice having a Dalek that, just doesn't just explode into some tinsely garbage under a little bit of gunfire. But I think I slightly resented the implication that Ace's Nitro 9 was better than the combined military might of Earth's security forces or whatever. But I think that's quite fun now. And I remember being very cross with this bit. And this was on the trailer, and it was a great trailer as well. So it was quite exciting, but of course, as I say, I had my eye on the bits that worried me, and I know this. I can't tell now, but I think they did change it for the DV. That bit was really badly dubbed, and his countdown was slightly out of sync with his thing. And again, that bothered me more than all the brilliant things in the episode. I actually used this episode in my second show. My stepson stole my sonic screwdriver, where I do a kind of ad-libbed précis of what happened like an excited child, and I just did that to illustrate a point, but it actually became the first round of applause of the show. And it's suddenly like, you can write jokes, you can make funny references and tie things together, but actually just pretending you're 14 again. And I never wrote that bit. I just sort of imagined the episode in my head and just described what happened and got to a climax. It always worked. Now, I like one thing that's pleasing about this is that I always felt the bricks were pleasingly solid on this bit in a show that can sometimes be a little bit beset with polystyrene. I think everything here seems a little bit hefty. There's an attempt, I think, to make in a show that at this period sometimes, as I say, things can explode into tinsel, and explosions can be sort of like sparklers. Everything seemed a bit sort of more real, and the smoke smelt and the bullets burned and the explosions had flames. That shot made me think, wow, this guy's a real hero. And as I say, I don't think he'd been mentioned in the pre-publicity. And I remember a friend of mine, an older friend of mine, saying, because as I say, I had started to sort of hang around other Doctor Who fans at this point. I did dally with a local group during this period, and it was the first time I'd sort of been digesting Doctor Who at the same time as sort of other Doctor Who fans. I love that bit where they swap and the thing. That's quite fun. I mean, again, it's actually sort of against my instincts because I don't like magic in Doctor or whatever, but it's a subtle enough and unimportant enough thing that it just makes you go, oh, that's quite fun. And they act it very well. They don't act well, I don't think, the bit where doesn't she go something like, these Daleks, and he goes, Daleks, and she goes, oh, Daleks, and it's so she pronounces it wrong, he pronounces it wrong, but somehow that teaches her to pronounce it correctly. Because Sylvester McCoy has a very odd diction in that he'll sometimes not pronounce the same word twice. The same word in this. It's not just alien words. He just sometimes pronounces words wrongly. So my friend said, "Oh, I think this Mike guy is bad," and I remember that smile that he gives when he walks away when Ace and the Doctor drive off, and I was like, no, this guy is the hero. You've completely misread that, And I remember saying to him, you just don't understand how these programs work. That guy is the guy that Ace is going to fall for, and it's all going to be. And I was completely wrong, and I was completely hoodwinked. I didn't see Mike's treachery coming at all, even though it's signposted by him introducing, Mr. Ratcliffe, who is George Sewell, who. Again, it was announced with some oomph, and I didn't think I really knew, and then I realised that I did. And since I've come to realise that even more what a coup George Sewell was in the early '60s. He was one of those realistic Joan Littlewoody type actors who lent so much sort of naturalism to still often quite mannered productions. He's great in some of things like. Is it Spindo or Big Breadwinner Hog? One of those. It's Spindo, I think. Really good and naturalistic in the earthy mould of the sort of Glyn Edwardses and some of those actors. Michael Sheard here. I mean, it seemed almost too obvious casting having him as the headmaster, and I thought, well, gosh, why is he doing that part? Because he was famous for Mr. Bronston in Grange Hill, and he did a lot of stuff. And you go, well, why is he chosen to play a similar part? And again, it's only when you get older that you go. Actors, even then, when there was loads of work about, there wasn't an awful lot of choice. It always amuses me when actors get, and he is, and bless him for doing I'm going to scratch behind my earlobe because I'm in communicating with my alien masters. Nobody notices. but it always amuses me when actors now go and they say, "What attracted you to that part?" And they go, "Well, I thought the character was marvelous." Well, what attracted me to it was that after I'd auditioned for it twice, they offered me the job. I mean, yeah, there are film stars, of course, who get the choice, but to be most actors aren't in an awful, in that much of a position to choose the jobs that they do, and so Michael Sheard was, probably hadn't done a bit of telly for a bit, and his agent rang up, and he probably got a decent fee from the BBC. Because if you think about it, she had played guest leads in quite a lot of Doctor Who's, and he's, it was a sign to me actually, because they'd announced who was going to be in this story, and Michael Sheard, Peter Halliday, and that was really exciting for me to be seeing people who'd been in old Doctor Who. And Sheard Sheard's a small tiny part. Peter Halliday does even less, and you suddenly went, God, so actors who were sort of big news in the 60s and 70s are now doing small parts. What's that all about? That, ladies and gentlemen, is the acting profession. The French Revolution book irritated the big jingles out of me, because it's not the same as the book in the in the original story. And I'm going, if you're gonna do a reference back to old Who, at least make it look like the old one, because the only people that are going to get it are the people that are going to know what the book looked like. I quite like this line about saying that they only had, do you remember all these things? And she goes, no. And he goes, yeah, humans manage to deceive themselves. And it's a nice line, that one, what self-deception matched only by their willingness to destroy themselves. That's a lovely line. There are lots of lovely lines here. There is a real attempt from Andrew Cartmel and his writers to make Doctor Who, kind of about something. And it does have a kind of rather sort of charmingly, we're going to change the, we're going to satirize the world, we're going to change the world, but it never, I don't think it ever spoils the story. And actually it really helps this story, because they've decided to go, well, let's have a look at what fascists are like, and of course this was clearly Davros, and John Leeson does a lovely job of this voice as well. I love the bit where he goes, I must be informed of their movements, and there's a little sort of croak on movements, and I didn't expect the reveal of what that turned out to be in episode 3. So there's lots of lovely misdirection and distraction, and these sets are great. This all looks absolutely fantastic. And the fact that actually, I know Michael Sheard is under the thrall of the Daleks, but he's quite a nice headmaster. So he's not playing Mr. Bronson, even though he looks exactly like him. And he does turn out to be a baddie, but he's a much more gentle character, isn't he? And I think that was in the trailer as well, because I would tape the trailers and I would watch them over and over and over again. The lighting down here is very nice. This is a very good set as well. Martin Collins, I think, is the set designer. So, and I'm only highlighting the things that really bugged me at the time, in order to show that I no longer think like that. I think this is a terrific episode. I love the setting. I love the nostalgia. I think the pacing of it is fantastic. I think all the guest characters are very nice. There's no sort of big eccentric performances here. Everyone's just doing a really good job. And I do like big eccentric performances in Doctor Who, but and it's little touches like this. When the Dalek materialises, it materialises from the inside first, so we get a nice little glimpse, but it's not exactly clear what it is, but it's just a little glimpse of the sort of internal sort of skeleton and doings of the Dalek inside. That's just a nice little extra layer of detail that this production seems to have. So kudos to Andrew Morgan, who had directed Time and the Rani, which is not a story that has a glowing reputation, in I was going to say in Haydock Towers or many other places. And he does have some very good directorial touches in Time and the Rani, but it's kind of not the same program as this. Time and the Rani has, a shoulder-padded space vixen spouting thesaurus-spawned dialogue. I don't know why the headmaster knees Ace in the bollocks, but he basically does, doesn't it? That's what the inference there is. Whereas this is a really exciting, heavy moving thriller. But this I was furious at, because everybody else I knew was going, "That's amazing! The Daleks climbing the stairs." And I'm going, "How many times did it say exterminate?" And in fact, I counted, because I think when it starts, and also the voice slightly changes. When it starts going up the stairs, it seemed to me like they'd gone for the slightly different Dalek voice, because it goes, "You will be exterminated," then exterminate. It seemed to shift a key or whatever. But also it says exterminate about a gazillion times. And I'm sort of going, if you want to exterminate, just exterminate him. And I think I counted that if you count through till next week when the headmaster shuts the door, Ace gets out, knocks out the headmaster, opens the door, gets the doctor out, shuts the door, moves the headmaster out of the way and runs off, and then the Dalek blows the door off. It will have had time to say exterminate, I think, 13 times. And you think, well, if you unless you have a line about saying something like "cannot exterminate till out of hover mode" or something. But and it happens at the end of the next episode, is that the Daleks say exterminate until they have time to rescue Ace. And that infuriated me. It still slightly annoys me. I mean, it's fantastic that the Dalek finally climbs the stairs. I'll give you that. And it was a big boon for Doctor Who at that time to be able to pull off that effect that it had never really managed to do before, and to stick two fingers up to all the lazy comedians and comedy sketches and commentators and all of that. It's all the Daleks, and indeed the show itself when it's being glib in Destiny of the Daleks. And go, actually, okay, that joke's over now. You can't do that. Daleks can climb the stairs. So, cannot fault the ambition, cannot fault the execution of the effect. It's just within the story where the Dalek then just says exterminate until the Doctor has time to escape. You're kidding no one. And because nobody seemed to mind that, I minded it very much and more until I later got over myself and just went, well, okay, it's fine. But I still do need to point it out. But it doesn't now really overshadow the episode for me. That's an episode I could happily sit down and watch and have a cracking time watching it. And actually, I remember watching it with some... It's funny, I've recently done Caves of Androzani, and I watched it with some university mates, and they sort of mocked it a bit. And then, because I stayed at university a bit longer, because I did a 4-year course, I'd got the sort of next generation of mates to watch Doctor Who with me, the younger lot coming through, who watched this with me, because when we were doing our showcase, we'd got the £10 check from Simon Williams. And I remember watching it with my friend Caroline and a few others. And they were, as I say, they were coming up. They were slightly younger, and they all loved it. And that gave me hope for the future. That not everybody was like the mates of my age who all kind of thought Doctor Who was a bit hokey and a bit naff. So I was very excited that my friends liked Remembrance of the Daleks, but. Having spoken to and read around, people slightly older than me, who were reading sort of pop culture magazines and were part of popular culture, and if I was 14, who were kind of older, slightly cooler kids at that time, Doctor Who was getting cool again, having sunk as pretty much as low as I could ever remember it sinking in sort of public opinion with season 24, which, as I have to say, there are times now when, especially when I hear Doctor Who being commentated upon with so much seriousness, it sucks all the fun out of it. I would quite happily stick on a bit of season 24 and sort of, but because there's no risk to the future of the show from it, go, no, this is absolutely fun. And I do understand those people who go, no, after sort of loads of continuity heavy stuff and the unnecessarily sort of grimness and violence of season 22, and it was a relief when season 24 suddenly had Doctor Who being fresh and fun and exciting. Damn it, and I can understand that, and I think that's a very reasonable position to take. But my self-loathing perspective has always been that if Doctor Who takes itself more seriously, that will somehow make it taken more seriously by the public, and it's really the public I want to like it. Now, as I say, I've got over myself a bit there, and I tend to, I think when I'm at my best, I'm just deciding whether I like Doctor Who on my own terms, because that's all that actually really matters. And just the same as you don't get happiness in the approval of others, Toby, you also don't get Doctor Who isn't good just because other people like it, but let's leave the psychiatrist there, shall we? It seemed to me, and as I say, and I've since speaking to other people, that this was a real sort of qualitative revivification of Doctor Who, and it had somewhat sort of regenerated, and it's an excellent production. I mean, it's a really good production. Andrew Morgan, I think, deserves a lot of credit for the way he stages everything and attention to detail. His casting is very good. It's a great, fresh, exciting script from Ben Aronovich that has something to say. And I know some grown-ups might be a bit slightly askance at the sort of slightly studenty politics of the Cartmel years, but as a young person who wanted Doctor Who to be about something, and certainly wanted it to be, anti-nuclear and anti-racist and all the things that I think a lot of us, it's very important to you when you're finding your way in the world to sort of feel that you're, that there's some part of the artistic culture that's going against what often you'd see, seem to be things that were got away with in the mainstream, that seemed quite appalling and scary and terrifying. It seemed great that there was a television program, was prepared to tackle those things, and also it meant that your program wasn't just entertainment, but it was about something, and that seemed to give it sort of extra brownie points. And I think, taking the Daleks and going, well, they are the ultimate in racial purity. Well, I'm going to make that the sort of sub-thread of the story and mirror that with some of the human characters. I think is very clever. It's a very clever use of an iconic Doctor Who monster, and it's a very clever thing to do with the storytelling, because it gives us, the different character pulls, and I think the stuff between Ace and Mike that we will see is lovely and excellent. But that's a great episode of Doctor Who, and I mean, I think it's so great. Shall I say that 13 times to emphasise my point, or would that just be too many? But I'm going to choose, but I have to be there's so many things I could choose. This 1963 setting. Why did they spell Foreman wrong? Come on. If you're going to do it properly. But anyway, I still like... and actually, I think the tie-ins with the first story for the 25th anniversary are perfectly legitimate things to do. And actually, it suits the story quite well, even though the whole thing about the Hand of Omega, seeing as the Doctor hasn't heard of the Daleks yet, is, we'll I'm sure talk about in later episodes. But I love that setting, also partially because recent history is quite easy to recreate very well. If you're at the BBC in 1988, where they have, the infrastructure of costume and design departments and props that are available and all that sort of stuff. So it's a good production choice. It's a good artistic choice. That looks good. That helps the story. That makes the setting seem right and recognisable, and yet just different enough. The soldier stuff that gives it the sort of Quatermassy unit years vibe it certainly appeals to me and speaks to me. And the fashions are just old enough to not look naff, but to still transport us away from the now. And in fact, I think everybody in Remembrance of the Daleks is dressed probably better than most people who were watching it. I think I really like the cast. I think Dursley McClendon coming out of nowhere and being this beautiful sort of heroic guy, and we will of course talk about him because he's taken on a great significance since. with Russell T Davis's "It's a Sin," which had parallels with him, the lead character, and I would say one of the other great things about it is the contrast between last year's Doctor Who and this year's Doctor Who. It really does feel like the show has had a real kick up the arse in terms of production and approach and storytelling and everything. But I wonder if Charles will choose the Dalek going up the stairs, which I cannot do, even though I accept it's an important step. It's an important hover. It's an important riposte to lazy critics, etc., etc., etc. Destroys a cliche. It's a wow moment. But I can't forgive the Daleks saying exterminate 13 times or whatever. And also because the moment that made me go wow, and the moment that I still think is a little bit sexy, is that Dalek laser beam coming out, hitting the soldier, turning him into a skeleton, which they even do now. And I love the fact that has kind of lived on and obviously evolved, and they could do it much better now. But then him flying back as well, so they don't only make it a stunt, they make it a special effect. And that's we only see the one death in that episode, but they really, really make it count. It's a really shocking moment, and it's a moment that's shocking within the context of the episode, but also as a Doctor Who fan makes you sit up and go, oh wow, they're trying to do things they used to do better than they used to do them, and that's always a thrill. It's evolution again from the it used to be the whole screen can turn negative, and then it's like, oh no, we can turn the actual person negative, and now it's like, well, negative, yeah, but let's actually let's X-ray them and fling them backwards. And I just think it announces, this show that has a bit of a shoddy reputation out there. We're 25 years old. We are still, fighting against the odds, fighting against our low budget, fighting against expectation, fighting against the time slot, because of course it had been, bunged opposite Coronation Street, and going, we are going to fight, and when we fight, we turn you into a skeleton and fling you backwards. What is Charles Norton going to choose as his favourite thing about episode 1 of Remembrance of the Daleks?
Thing number 1, and I suppose it's a general thing really, although it probably most of all applies to episode 1, and that's the story's setting, when it's set and where it's set, which is 1963 London. It's pretty much the first time that we've had a Doctor Who story set in such an immediate past. Before this, you will get Doctor Who stories that are set in the 19th century or the 1920s or the First World War. But this is the first time you've actually got a Doctor Who story set within the lifespan of the show itself, albeit only just. And it really, really works. It works very well because Doctor Who is ultimately a child of the early 60s, specifically of 1963. And I think that's one of the clever things that the story does. It acknowledges that its creation is informed by its time, which is probably why if you're trying to make a Superman film set in the present day, it's always a bit difficult, because ultimately Superman is a product of 1930s America, and it kind of works in the context of 1930s America, and it doesn't necessarily work that well in the context of, well, anything else. And Doctor Who's a bit like that. Doctor Who just sort of kind of feels at home in 1963, and Remembrance of the Daleks is the first story to recognise that and have fun with it. It would have been very easy to have gotten quite lazy with the 1960s setting. It would have been very easy to have just seen it's a 1960s story and set it in sort of some nominal Avengers Land pastiche of what people think of when they think of the 60s. And they don't do that. They recognise the fact that this is a this is not a 60s story, this is a 1963 story, and it is a very recognisable milieu in which the story sits. And it really evokes that time, that very specific time and that very specific era extremely well. That sort of early 60s period, that sort of early Mad Men period full of racial tensions, a period when Britain didn't have very much money, a period that's sort of charged with all sorts of dreams and aspirations and tied up with ideas of the Cold War and the space race and Kennedy. And it's a period, as I say, in which Doctor Who sits very, very happily. And Remembrance of the Daleks is sort of the first story in the series to do that, and recognise that no matter how recent, this is actually a really fascinatingly charged period of history that you can have a lot of fun with, and that something that is so informed by sort of post-war anxieties like the Daleks is always going to sit very well in that setting, and it does.
Well, I mean, I did outline that as something that I could have gone for. I think Charles very eloquently summed up why that's a good call, but I didn't choose it, so I don't get the point. And annoyingly, I think I probably would have thought about, the setting, the 1963 setting, as my bonus thing, my kind of overall thing, but I now cannot do that. Because Charles has the advantage that, if he chooses something before me, I then can't choose it because it's gone. Although, if I choose something that he then chooses for a later episode of his bonus thing, I get the point for that. But it's history tells us that it's quite unlikely, and he'll just choose 5 completely different things from the 5 things I choose. But that means, we facilitate a conversation, albeit one that isn't an actual conversation, about various different elements of the story, and that is absolutely fine. I think the 63 setting is a stroke of genius. I mean, it seems so obvious now. How do you celebrate the 25th anniversary? And I know we have a complicated relationship with how much the show should refer to its past or not, but they actually make a virtue of it in this story, and the setting works beyond the fact that it's the setting of when Doctor Who itself started. And as Charles says, it's a very 1963 story, except, I'm going to sneeze. Excuse me. Except that, as we'll discover, it's not perhaps quite as dark outside as you would expect for November 1963. And I've seen certain fan theories sort of try and retcon that and go, well, this clearly isn't November because it's clearly intended to be, as we will discover next week. But and I'm more inclined to go, well, there's some spacey reason why it's not dark outside than, well, it's more likely April then, because clearly the production isn't telling us that. The production is trying to tell us this is November 1963 when Doctor. It's just that it was filmed when it was still light at various times, for most of the day. So and also you don't really do night filming if you can, unless you really, really need to. So, the production is intended that, even though it knows that we know, and that it knows that it would probably be darker outside. Anyway, we will discuss that, I'm sure, next week. Again, this is one of those classics of Doctor Who, and I think it entirely deserves its reputation. I'm so glad I'm not that 14-year-old who was so desperate to be cross with stuff. And as I say, I can understand that urge. I am not immune to that urge. And even now, I sometimes have to check myself. And I think even now that is still a part of my DNA. But I do try so hard to battle against it now, because I think it's better not to be like that. Although maybe that that crossness that I had fired my passion to make me, explore Doctor Who and go over it over and over again, and made me whatever this is that I am today. But I wish he'd relaxed a little bit. I wish he hadn't been quite so cross. He was hurting a bit. yeah, he was shaking his fist at the world, and he couldn't make much of a dent on the world, but he could sure, you know, he could sure kick the bejesus out of Doctor Who if he wanted to. But I'm really pleased, and I have such fond memories of doing that commentary with the cast and crew for Phantom. And it's a story that bears examination, it bears discussion. It's an intelligent, layered script, as well as a very nicely mounted action adventure with lots of gunfights and explosions and all of that. It sort of ticks all the boxes. It's thoughtful and it's intelligent and it's fun. And I think the two leads have a lovely chemistry. Yeah, it's all around pretty special. Yeah, so sorry, 14-year-old Toby, but you're wrong. But come on, that was a long time ago. And the past is another country, which means that Mike Smith probably hates it. But anyway, look, I'm going to stop now, and we all know how to kill something, don't we? You say you're going to 13 times, so that's the end. The end. The end. The end. I'm running up the stairs now. The end. I'm trying to get out of the door. The end. See? I mean, I could go on, but I won't. Goodbye. 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 Stop. Thank you ever so much for listening to Happy Times and Places, which is presented by me, Toby Haydoke, and my special guest, Charles Norton, who has nothing to do with social media at all. I'm nonetheless grateful to him and to the patrons who make these podcasts possible, and they include Mark Cockram, Charles Coffin, Simon Coling, Paul Colnaghy, Ben Cook, Martin Cook, Matt Corner, Ben Cowdell, Philip Craggs, Lee Kremin, David Crew, Steve Cunniff, Dave Curran, Simon Curtis, Paul Philip Dahlgren, Matt Dale, Rob Dawson, Chris Davies, Hugh Davies, Robert Davies, Shanti Day, Ian Dean, Tim Dickinson, Drew, Paul Dykes, Andrew East, Jeff Edwards, Andrew Egan, Fleet Boy, Mark Findlay Smith, Chris Phone, Nev Fountain, David Gillespie, Charles Gears, Lisa Glethill, Robin Groan, Paul J. Guest, and Thomas Guerrier. The music is by Dave Gates, the artwork by Dylan Patterson. Would you like it if one of those names being read out loud over the closing credits, well, no, as the closing credits, over the closing music, would you like your name to be part of the closing credits, like Vision Mixer Shirley Coward, or Rostrum Camera Ken Morse, or the BBC would like to extend its thanks to the Royal Navy for its cooperation in the making of this programme? Well, that can be your privilege too, and you don't have to supply me with a battleship or stock footage of boats or some highly trained personnel in the arts and crafts of sea-based warfare to perform as non-speaking supporting artists. No, you just have to sign up for £3 per month. That's the lowest tier. There are higher tiers going all the way up as far as you'd like, but the lowest tier, £3 a month, is extremely gratefully received by me and gets you access to everything in terms of the audio releases that I do and all of the audio release bonuses that you get in Patronville, which include early releases 6 months ahead for Happy Times and Places, exclusives. You get a whole podcast of your own called Far Too Much Information, monthly Ask Me Anythings, various little bits and bobs from my archive, all sorts of stuff. £3 a month, going right up, and that's a monthly commitment that you can cancel at any time. That's patreon.com/Toby Haydoke. If you can't do the monthly thing or don't want to, I know that times are tough, and you don't have to. It's all most of the stuff's out there for free, if a little bit later. But particularly like something that I've done, or a feeling particularly flush, or have won the lottery, or if I sound particularly hungry or needy or sad, or just want to pay me to shut up, you could go to Ko-fi.com. That's Ko-fi, Ko-fi.com/Toby Haydoke, and just do a one-off payment whenever you like. However, I am fully aware how difficult times are at the moment. I'm just grateful that you've chosen to listen to this stuff, and if this is what you're enjoying listening to, I'm so happy about that. And I'd be grateful if you could do something that costs you nothing at all, and that is to go to iTunes, Spotify, Patreon, give these 5 stars, favourite them, follow them, like them, do whatever you like to them. Download them and listen to them under the duvet. No, what? No, just you know what I'm saying. Give them nice reviews. That really helps with passing trade and internet attention and all that sort of thing. And I'd extend that to Twitter, where these have their own Twitter feed at Haydoke Podcasts. If you could say nice things about them on social media and point people in their direction. It's a very crowded market out there, and I would love it if people would listen to these because they're full of joy and celebration and love, and I hope they're put together in a way that is entertaining. But, anybody out there in that vast repository of cyberspace, particularly the corner that Doctor Who inhabits, needs all the help they can get, and I am no different. So if you can give your help that costs nothing to give except a little bit of your time, I would be most grateful. I am a comedian too. That's my day job. Well, I'm an actor. That's my day job. But my night job, by night. By day, I am a mild-mannered actor. By night, I am an avenging comedian who performs stand-up comedy every Tuesday night. That's my regular gig at Excess Malarkey Comedy Club. It's just changed location, but that hasn't dampened its lustre. In fact, it may have given us a new lease of life. We've won a couple of awards recently as well, so we are the best kept secret really in the comedy world. It's a highly regarded club in Manchester at 8 p.m. every Tuesday. I MC it every week, and there's usually 4 comedians from the national or international comedy circuit, and I keep the prices of that low as well. It's £3 for members, £6 for non-members, which is ridiculous pricing in this day and age. But again, it's just an attempt to spread a bit of joy, but be accessible to all. That's Excess Malarkey Comedy Club. It's on Twitter at Excess Malarkey, and if you could spread the word about that and even pop in yourselves, that would be very nice. Now, if you're not in Manchester, you can check out some of the stuff that we did online during the pandemic at twitch.tv/Excess Malarkey. I'm also trying to think of a way to update that more regularly with content, hate that word, to make use of that Twitch channel, but we haven't quite got to grips with that yet. But we're open to ideas, and we are experimenting, so it's worth keeping an eye on or subscribing to that, which I think you can do. That's twitch.com/Excess Malarkey. Okay, well, that's the end of that episode. It's I tell you what's nice about this. Life gets a bit harder as you get older in some ways, not in others, I know, and everything's relative, but certainly in terms of life is an accumulation of regrets, isn't it? And of course, the older that you are, the more there's a longer queue of them, waiting to tap you on the shoulder and bother you. And the longer you survive, the more you accumulate. But it is actually quite nice also casting away some of those things that bothered you and worried you when you were younger. And I was so bothered by so much to do with Doctor Who, and I have to say one of the few joys of middle age is. And maybe it's just because Doctor Who is riding high at the moment, and there's so much expectation about it, and it's it seems to be safe for a good while yet. Touch wood, touching everything. That I can just enjoy the various different iterations of Doctor Who as they are. I've always liked the black and white stuff, but with the season 2 Blu-ray box set, I'm suddenly just seeing a lot of the Hartnell stuff afresh. I was even talking to my mate Johnny Camden the other day about The Chase, and sort of going, it's sort of rubbish in a lot of places, but it is what it is, and for what it is, it is so possible to enjoy it on its own terms and sort of almost chortle at its shortcomings. Whereas this, another Dalek story from many years later, which I had so many hang-ups about for various reasons. I was just waiting for Doctor Who to prickle me with embarrassment because I had to go into school the next day, though no, a lot of people weren't watching, sadly. And even though this was such a renaissance, this story, I still had all of those hang-ups and would have a list of sort of grievances about, even if it was an episode that seemed, so good on so many levels, there would be, things that really bothered me about it. And they seem so unimportant now. And, that's life, isn't it? Things that churn you up and seem so important at the time. You look back years later and you go, what was I worried about? I suppose it's a bit like, leaving an all-powerful device in a grave, in a coffin, and then going off on your travels and then coming back and realising you've got to do something with that all-powerful weapon in that coffin. Otherwise it'll come back to haunt you. No, do you know you're supposed to not worry about it? Can't remember now. What was I talking about? Just heard a beep. I don't know what that was. I hope I'm not being haunted by a ghost robot. Anyway, ruined my metaphor. But I'm told that apparently one of the pleasures of these podcasts is that I say metaphors that run away with me, which I'd never had down on my list of skills. And I'm rather saddened that is, what you want is you want to appeal to people because of your erudition and wit. And what people say is, I like it when you make a mess of things despite your best intentions. Oh well, we can only be. What? Yeah. I want to be. What? The long and the short. I want to be good rather than being. Yeah, I want to be good on purpose rather than. Yeah, he's funny, but by mistake is not really what any comedian wants on their epitaph. I suppose it's better than being he's not funny, but by mistake. But then I wouldn't be trying to. It's going to run away with me again, isn't it? I think I'm just going to go and bury an all-powerful device in a coffin and forget about it for 25 years. See you later.